Today we interview Dr. Jim Meehan about all things related to COVID-19.
But I don't want to talk about it. I want to focus on business.
Hey, I agree with you, but I have this little theory going that
Okay.
if a business isn't allowed to be open,
Yes.
it's going to be closed.
Okay, well, that appears to be true.
That's correct. And that's why in less than 15 minutes, Dr. Jim Meehan is going to answer all the tough questions related to COVID-19. Dr. Fauci, COVID-19 treatments, inflated case numbers, and mandated masks.
But do we have time to still talk about vaccines? Because I don't know if I want to get one.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
Now, 3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here.
Yes, and yes! We are in the air everywhere, sharing the truth from the booth. Jason, we're going to ask Dr. Jim Meehan 10 questions about COVID-19 in 10 minutes or less.
Nice.
I'm excited about it. So question number 1, Dr. Jim Meehan, is what is your medical background?
So I'm an ophthalmologist. I specialize in ocular immunology and inflammation. I'm a former medical editor of a medical journal of the same name. So I have a deep background in how the immune system works and how that immune system can be used and leveraged to prevent diseases. I'm also well trained in functional medicine, integrative medicine, nutrition. So I've gone beyond just my medical training to get additional information to broaden my perspective and bring a whole new level of care to my patients.
Okay, question number 2 I have for you is let's talk about Dr. Fauci. Who is Dr. Fauci and should we trust him?
Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci is a longtime bureaucrat and in the deep state Washington establishment. He's been around for a long time. His primary area of focus is HIV. He's a multiple-time failure in his inability to create an HIV vaccine. So he was just, he's the former National Institute of Health director. He's now directing the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. And he was kind of the guy in the office of that institution that Donald Trump had to go to probably to create a panel for this coronavirus pandemic that we're experiencing. Should we trust him? I don't think so. I think he has been he's demonstrated himself to be a liar. He told us on multiple occasions that masks didn't work. Don't wear masks. They won't block the coronavirus. And then he flipped and he flopped and he changed his story. And he came back around months later to say, yeah, you should probably wear them. And the reason I said you shouldn't wear them before is because we were trying to protect the supply of PPE for our healthcare workers. That by definition tells us that he lied to the public to protect the industry. And I think that makes him untrustable.
According to Newsweek, Dr. Fauci backed the controversial Wuhan lab with U.S. dollars for conducting risky coronavirus research known as gain of function research. Dr. Jim, why do you think Dr. Fauci had to conduct his gain of function research in China?
Well, because number one, it was deemed to be so controversial and so dangerous that international law and treaties basically banned it here in the United States and most European countries, most countries in the world. One of the few places that you could conduct this controversial, dangerous gain-of-function research in which you're tinkering around with dangerous viruses and you're trying to make them more dangerous, that they could escape from the lab and they could reap havoc on the population is that research should never have been done. So he exported it kind of under the cover of darkness, in my opinion, without appropriate approvals, in my opinion, and he used taxpayer dollars to fund that illegal, controversial, dangerous research.
What is gain-of-function research? If I break it down very simply for people like myself who say, well, maybe we need sock puppets. What is gain-of-function research?
Well, let's apply it to the current pandemic, and let's say that you took what they did at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They took a coronavirus, the SARS coronavirus, and that was, whether it was isolated from the bats or it was taken from samples that were from the 2003 outbreak of SARS-CoV-1, the first outbreak of a SARS virus, but they took that virus and they gain of function implies that you're inserting new genetic sequences that might make that virus more infectious, more transmittable, that might have certain features that add a gained function to that virus that makes it, more infectious. For example, in SARS-CoV-2, we find a furin cleavage site. It's not found in any other beta coronaviruses in that same SARS-CoV-2 family, the coronavirus family from which SARS-CoV-2 arises. It's not in there anyplace else. It's new. It was put in there by all evidence and by multiple scientists that are reviewing this kind of literature. That furin cleavage site was added to the genetic sequence of this coronavirus.
So they are wrestling a bat out of a cave in Wuhan or near Wuhan, China. Then they isolate the virus that's naturally occurring. There's already the coronavirus naturally occurs in a bat. And then they try to increase its transmissibility?
Yeah, that's exactly
Why
right.
would you do that?
Well, it's a great question. So most scientists would say you should not do that because you could lose control of the virus. This is how all science fiction horror movies start, is with a modification, an evolution, a change in a virus that makes it more dangerous. So you should not be doing that because it could escape from a viral lab unintentionally or intentionally. It could be a bioweapon. Bad actors create bad weapons, bad bioweapons.
I'm glad you said it's like in a sci-fi movie because this whole thing we talk about Fauci,
it does.
It always brings me back to Jeff Goldblum, Jurassic Park. And he says, your scientists spent so much time wondering if they could, they never stopped to think if they should.
That's exactly right. That's
Wow,
exactly right.
Jurassic Park knowledge right there. Mega point for you, so that's impressive. 1 mega point. Now, okay, how dangerous is COVID-19 if infected individuals are allowed to be treated with hydroxychloroquine or a nebulizer and an FDA-approved asthma treatment?
Well, let's start with the first question. How dangerous is it? Based on the epidemiology data, for people under the age of 40, it's less dangerous than a seasonal influenza. We're not talking about a bad influenza. We're talking about regular standard influenza. In fact, most children under the age, young people under the age of about 20, you're about 50 times more likely to die of drowning than to die of coronavirus. About 24 children in the United States have died supposedly of coronavirus. All of them had serious autoimmune, immune suppression diseases for which they were very susceptible for a whole host of other diseases. For certain members of the population, young, healthy, and it's not all about age either, Clay. It's about the health of that individual. If you have multiple comorbidities, if you're sick, you have diabetes, you're obese, you have high blood pressure, you're on the, you have cancer, you're in the last years of your life, a strong wind could end your life. And this virus you're going to be very susceptible to it. Those are the people that need to be protected. But, people like you and I and most of the people in this room, we are not at high risk. We don't need to be pretending that we can hide from this virus in our homes and behind a mask.
Okay, I have 3 final questions, and then Dr. Jay Schroeder and as well as Dr. Jay Schroeder as well as Jason Beasley have a question for you. So here we go. Should we, as a United States country, should we be implementing the Chinese lockdown approach to dealing with COVID-19?
Absolutely not. So that is a first-time experiment in the history of medicine and pandemics. We've never done this before. The quarantining the entire population is a failed experiment. We should put a nail in that coffin. Never again should we go back to it because it was a complete failure. You don't quarantine healthy people in their homes. That shut down our economy. There is a shadow pandemic for which we're going to pay a tremendous cost in the loss of life and life years, people killing themselves in despair and despondency because they were feared into hiding in their homes. Their jobs were destroyed. The economy was in collapse. That lockdown is an absolute failure. And we have other examples in other countries like Sweden where they didn't implement these draconian lockdowns. They didn't shut down their schools, and they are doing very well. They're doing better than many of the other European countries that did use draconian lockdowns to try to mitigate the virus. They didn't destroy their economy. They didn't put a whole bunch of people, their citizens, out of work, and they actually have the deaths per 100,000 that are better than Italy, Spain, the UK, and many others.
So we've got 3 minutes. We're coming in hot with 5 questions in 3 minutes, or 4 questions in 3 minutes. So here we go. How are the case numbers being inflated? Because I keep hearing the case numbers and the numbers of deaths are being inflated. How is this happening?
How are they not? So I'm very concerned. So we learned some weeks ago now that the CDC was exposed and caught basically in the process of conflating and inflating the numbers because they were counting multiple tests as separate cases. So an individual that tests positive and then they go on quarantine, they may be tested 4, 5, 6 times during that period of quarantine until they manifest a clearance of the disease and antibodies are present. They may get 6, 10, 12 tests, and all of those tests were being counted as a positive case. So one person that is tested 12 times should still be one test. It should not be 12 cases. Now, there's other problems. It's if you got an antibody test and you got a DNA PCR test, both of those are being counted as separate cases. Then we have all these other reports that at this point are so concerning that President Trump has demanded that all health departments in all states send their data to Health and Human Services for review. They can still send it to their state health department, but there's so much inflation of the data.
There we go.
That it needs to be checked off on. We need some accountants to look at this data and make sure it's not being inflated. There are stories all over this country, and some even here in my own patients that went to the health department. They signed in. They wanted to get a free antibody test. The wait was too long. They gave up after 37 minutes. They walk out. They never got tested. But 5 days later, they got 2 positive reports. Each person that never got tested got 2 positive reports that they were positive for COVID-19.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable. It is just to me. I mean, it's a thing where I should rephrase. It is believable because I know it's now happening.
Right.
But for a guy like you who's a doctor, to really put your reputation on the line,
right?
You come out and you say that, and I'm just saying hypothetically, if you came out and you made these claims and it was proven that you weren't correct, you could be risking your career here to make these statements. And so this is the words you just said carry a lot of weight here. Now, should we be wearing a mask and should we be listening to Bill Gates?
Absolutely not. So here's the thing about masks. The science has been very clear on this. For about 30 years, we've been testing the safety and efficacy of masks. There's a reason that we don't recommend masks for influenza because they have been shown in the highest level, highest order of science is randomized controlled trials and multiple randomized controlled trials that we meta-analyze or we do a systemic review. So the highest level of science says that masks do not work to prevent the transmission of influenza. Now, there are no randomized controlled trials of SARS-CoV-2 at present, so there certainly are no meta-analysis. But the meta-analysis of influenza have clearly said we shouldn't mask the population because we know that there are risks associated with wearing a mask. Now, any medical intervention should be evaluated, and the individual should make a decision: do the risks outweigh, do the benefits, outweigh the risks? And in my opinion, as a medical physician, the risks are too high, and there's too little benefit for masks to be recommended. The risk of lowering your arterial oxygen, of contaminating that mask, feeling like you're invulnerable, that the mask actually protects you when we know it didn't. And by the way, that's what our Surgeon General said. That's what Anthony Fauci said early in the pandemic. They said, this mask will not block the transmission of coronavirus. Don't buy them. Don't use them. It's ineffective. They changed their tune. The reason that they changed their tune had nothing to do with science. The science has not changed. Now, I will say there is a new study out there that just came out that it does is a more systemic review of the existing science as it relates to SARS-CoV-2. And that study by Jing Zhao out of a specialist from Hong Kong, China, or Hong Kong, I shouldn't say Hong Kong, China, but from Hong Kong, clearly says masks provided no benefit in this systemic review of the existing science. So when people say, and they'll often debate with me on social media, and they'll give me a long list of these studies that purport to say masks are effective. When you break down that science, you will find that they're using low-level science that is based on retrospective, observational, case controls, theoretical science, all of which is inferior to making a sound decision. So we look to the higher order, the more sound, reliable science, and that science clearly says masks are ineffective.
Okay. Should we be listening to Bill Gates?
Absolutely not. I mean, the last person that we should be looking and listening to is Bill Gates. He's got his own agenda. I don't know what it is fully. The more I understand about his agenda, the less interested I am in listening to him. I think everybody should do their own due diligence. He's certainly not a doctor. He's a multiply conflicted in interest, vaccine investor. He's making a ton of money promoting and producing vaccines. He's figured out how to become a philanthropreneur. That's a hard thing. He's making tons of money promoting vaccines, and there's a lot of damage and injury that's occurring in his vaccine programs in third world countries.
Jason Beasley, we have time for one final question from you and one final question here from Dr. J.
Yep. So you are a doctor,
Yes,
so
I am.
would trust your not opinion, but your facts on all of this. And I've listened to you speak, and you have a wealth of information a lot of people need to hear. Just recently, I learned that one of my clients and good friends, Dr. Artis, his father-in-law was misdiagnosed with COVID, pumped full of chemicals, and killed by a hospital in Texas due to COVID protocols. And Artis fought tooth and nail to try to get him out of there. But unfortunately, because the family trusted what the doctors had to say and they said we were just following protocol, they let him go for about 5 days until they finally ended it with morphine, killing him. And so what Dr. Artis has been telling me to tell other people is you don't have to listen to what a doctor says. You can choose to seek treatment elsewhere. So you being a doctor, is that true?
That is absolutely true. And that story that you've just related is played out all over this country because we have been misinformed and misled, and there's been these assassination pieces on low-cost evidence-based therapeutics like hydroxychloroquine, vitamin D, vitamin C, budesonide. What the pharmaceutical industry does is they buy science. They pay scientists to create pseudoscience. We saw these series of really weak studies that were ultimately retracted. VA, the Lancet article that was shown to be complete science fiction. Those were assassination pieces funded by the pharmaceutical industry to dismiss and diminish the relevance of this safe and effective therapeutic. The doctors are calling me here in Tulsa, and they're saying, Dr. Meehan, I've been exposed, or I'm afraid of, I'm afraid I'm going to be exposed, and would you treat me with hydroxychloroquine? And I said, absolutely, I would. I think the science really supports it. They said, yeah, I read it too. I think it's pretty clear. Despite what we hear in the mainstream media, the science is really clear. But what happened with that misinformation was hydroxychloroquine was completely diminished to the point where some states, the Oklahoma Board of Pharmacy actually restricted the prescription of hydroxychloroquine in our state so that I couldn't prescribe it when I called the first time. The first physician, ER physician, calls me, and I'm prescribing it for him. They said, what's the diagnosis code? And I said, well, I've never been asked. Why are you asking me about the diagnosis code? That's, protected health information. I'm not sure I'm sure I'm not going to provide that to you. But they informed me that it was restricted in our state. I rose a stink about that. A week later, we removed that restriction. But in many states today, the doctors are preventing from being able to prescribe hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and azithromycin. A proven protocol, randomized controlled trials are showing the efficacy and the safety of this protocol all over this country.
Right.
But they're not able to use that as a preventative, as an acute treatment, because if we use it early, we can drastically change the course of this disease. People will suddenly the cytokine storm goes out, the viral replication is diminished,
Right.
and they start to recover. But what's happening in our hospitals that, and it's very true. Right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I had an interaction with a physician from a local hospital, one of our prominent local hospitals. She was telling me that she won't use hydroxychloroquine. She doesn't believe that the science is sound. She's only read, she still believed the Lancet article was a legitimate article. So she's not providing her patients hydroxychloroquine. She said she had 21 COVID-19 infected patients on ventilators in the hospital right now, that she's had at least 6 deaths. And I informed her in this interaction, and I can show all of you the interaction. It's right on I screenshot it before she would delete it. But she was accountable with her misinformation and her bad science. She was responsible for almost 1% of all the deaths in Oklahoma.
Wow.
Because she was misinformed. She hasn't read the science. She's reading headlines, titles, and abstracts. And she's not aware that this attack on hydroxychloroquine has been perpetrated. And so our families, our husbands, wives, daughters, parents are being killed not by the virus per se, but by misapplication of bad science. And we can't ignore the fact that we've incentivized this process to occur in our hospitals.
True.
So in New York City, if you haven't seen the work of Erin Marie RN, she is a nurse whistleblower that was at the epicenter of New York's outbreak at Elmhurst Hospital. And she has exposed that the hospital was allowing patients to decompensate in their hospital, so that they were moved to ventilator, because everybody knows now that if a hospital can admit someone with a COVID-19 diagnosis, they get a $13,000 bonus.
Right.
And if they go to ventilator, they get a $39,000 bonus. Show me an incentive and I'll show you an outcome.
Yep.
Charles Munger said that, and it's so true in medicine. And that's what we're doing. We've got all these incentives to treat this disease wrongly. We've removed safe, effective therapeutics, and we've relied on bad medicine that reimburses well.
Okay, Dr. Jay Schrader, we have time for one final question, sir. What question do you have for the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Jim Meehan?
Yeah, so my question comes from, and it's really an issue that I have for my family, is the vaccines. The safety and the efficacy of a vaccine that's being rushed through, the chemicals that are in the vaccine, the neurotoxins that are in there. Can you talk about, because there's no chance my family will take this, but, talk about mandated vaccines. Right. So this is a big deal for me personally. Could you talk to people who really are misinformed by all this stuff?
Right. Well, from the beginning, we've been, the path has been laid to manipulate the public into believing that their only hope is a vaccine. Throughout time, our entire vaccine program is based on very low-level science. Because vaccines are classified as a biologic, they are not required to be tested to the same gold standard levels of randomized controlled trials using inert placebo.
Nor are the companies held accountable for injuries.
And they are not held accountable. I'm so glad that you know that. So many people do not know that you cannot sue a vaccine manufacturer. 1986 in the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. And we cannot hold them accountable for the weak science that they've been that they're using to mislead us. Now, this coronavirus vaccine, number one, we've been trying for 30, 40 years to create a coronavirus vaccine, the common cold, an affliction that afflicts everyone every year, multiple times a year. We've been trying to create a vaccine. We tried to create a vaccine for SARS-CoV-1. When they administered the vaccine to the test animals, and then the test animals were then exposed to the wild-type virus, it melted their organs. I mean, it literally killed so many of the test
Melted
animals.
their organs?
The cytokine storm was so overabundant. It's called an enhanced autoimmune reaction. And it was a dangerous reaction. We skipped the animal studies in these SARS-CoV-2. We skipped the animal studies. We shortcutted the phase 1 clinical trials. Fewer patients were tested in that. We are fast-tracking this vaccine, and we are likely to have a more potential deaths from adverse events from this vaccine. The other thing is we're working with a new type of vaccination. The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are based on a genetic technology, mRNA.
It's going to change your genetics.
And it's going to change our genetics. It's hijacking our genetic machinery intracellularly to create the antibodies. Now we have no idea. This is a new technology that should be studied in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of
Not
patients
3 months?
for many years, for probably 10 plus years. But we're not going to have that. They're actually testing this vaccine in third world countries right now. Everybody should be appalled by the fact that we're using third world countries, women, children, pregnant women are being experimented on by our government.
And I live in Nashville, and actually Vanderbilt's advertising for people to come in to be in the trial.
Right.
Not in a million years.
I mean, and I would tell anybody that will listen, do not be at the front of that line.
No.
Do not, whatever you do not be at the front of that line.
Just get out of the line.
Yeah, get out of the line. I'm not going to stand in that line. In fact, I'm not going to tolerate any mandates of any medical procedure. That is a procedure that should be left to the individual patient after full informed consent. So I think that's where they're going. They're going to try to mandate it. The mask mandates are just, a part of the preparation, the preparing the minds, increasing the fear so that more people are more likely to submit to mandatory, medical procedures.
Easier to manipulate them.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. My brain's going to explode. I got to ask you, if I'm listening right now and I want to learn more about you, sir, or I want to receive maybe some of the papers you've written or read some of your blog posts, where can I go, Dr. Jim, to find this additional information? Right. Well, you can go to my website, and I've got a blog page there, but my website is meehanmd.com. It's MEEHANMD, like medicaldoctor.com. Brother, I thank you so much for being on the show, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And again, just thank you for sharing the truth. I know it's uncomfortable. I know you get a lot of negative feedback. I can say, though, I'm seeing the tide turn where thousands upon thousands of people are sharing what you're writing, and there seems to be a momentum shift as people are waking up to the facts. Right. But thank you for being out front with this. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for being brave yourself and getting these facts and this truth out there, because it's the only way that we stop this fraud, corruption, and pseudoscience. We're going to end this thing with a boom. Jason, are you prepared to end with a boom?
Oh, always.
Dr. J, are you psychologically prepared to end with a boom?
I'm preparing now.
Dr. Jim, are you medically prepared to end with a boom?
Medically prepared.
Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1, boom!